Chapter 1. The Shattered Masquerade. It began with the echo of splintering stone, a sound both unfamiliar and impossibly final, reverberating through the gilded corridors of Brackenthwaite Hall. The grand estate, hidden away in the fog-laden hills of Surrey, was awash with guests on this most anticipated of evenings. Silk and laughter mingled with the notes of a string quartet. Jewelled brooches winked beneath crystal chandeliers, and at the heart of the ballroom, Lady Agatha Lockridge presided over her annual masquerade, every inch the formidable hostess. Few, if any, noticed the subtle groan of old masonry from the east wing. Fewer still would recall the footman slipping discreetly from the service door, face shadowed by the mask of anonymity, or the nervous glances exchanged between Lady Agatha's son Lionel and his American bride Clara. In such a company, secrets slipped as easily as champagne. It was precisely at the stroke of 10, just as the orchestra struck up a waltz, that chaos punctured the festive air. There was a violent thunderclap, stone grinding, glass shattering, a scream wrenched from somewhere high above. The guests froze. The string players faltered. A handful of revellers surged to the windows where outside the ornamental façade, an elaborate centuries-old marble frontage, had collapsed in a cloud of dust and broken statuary. Pandemonium followed. Guests spilled from the ballroom in a surge of colour and panic, tripping over fallen masks and abandoned glasses. House staff sprinted toward the disaster, and amid the cries of "Call a doctor" and "Is anyone hurt?" a single figure remained motionless beneath the broken arch, the body of Hugh Cartwright, Lady Agatha's trusted legal adviser, his dinner jacket torn, his white mask shattered beside him. Blood pooled beneath the rubble, staining the manicured grass crimson. Lady Agatha, pale but composed, issued orders with a voice steeled by generations of aristocracy. Clara wept, clinging to Lionel's sleeve. Lionel himself looked dazed, lips moving in silent calculation. Only a handful noticed old Mrs. Blythe, the housekeeper, slip quietly away through the servants' door. Within minutes the estate's makeshift order was restored. The injured were tended to in the drawing-room, a nervous local constable summoned from the village, and the remnants of the party herded into the salon, where Lady Agatha, her composure now brittle, tried to restore calm. But the night's enchantment was irretrievably lost. Whispers began. How had the façade, centuries old and restored only last spring, come down with such violence? Why was Hugh Cartwright, never a man to linger outdoors, beneath it at that precise moment? And whose voice, shrill and unfamiliar, had been heard moments before the collapse? As the guests speculated, the night's shadow lengthened. Lionel Lockridge was seen pacing the corridor, jaw clenched, a fragment of marble still clutched in his hand. Clara was ushered upstairs by her maid, eyes wide, fingers trembling at her throat. Sir Bertram Foyle, Lady Agatha's old friend and neighbour, exchanged urgent whispers with the butler, Mr. Hawkes, while the young artist-in-residence, Simone Dulac, lingered at the periphery, her sketchbook pressed to her chest, a strange intensity in her gaze. By midnight word had spread through the house. The collapse was no accident. The ornate marble anchors had been tampered with, loosened deliberately, leaving the structure fatally unstable. Hugh Cartwright's death was murder, engineered with subtlety and nerve. Lady Agatha ordered all doors locked. No one was to leave the estate until the matter was resolved. "We owe it to Hugh," she declared, voice unwavering, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of grief, "and to the safety of us all." It was in the heavy hush that followed her pronouncement, a hush charged with fear, suspicion, and the rustle of secrets, that the name was uttered almost reverently by one of the guests. "Hercule Poirot. He must be summoned. If anyone can pierce this tangle, it is he." And as the guests looked uneasily at one another, the foundation of trust that had underpinned their circle seemed to crumble, much like the ornate façade outside. Somewhere among them a murderer waited, masked by civility, shielded by reputation, and perhaps driven by a motive as old and solid as the stones that had just fallen. Tonight, nothing was what it seemed, and the real game, beneath the masquerade, had only just begun. Chapter 2. The First Clues. Dawn crept over Brackenthwaite Hall, bleaching the fog and revealing the damage wrought in the night. The once proud façade now lay in jagged ruins upon the lawn, cordoned off by a length of velvet rope, and a small, deeply uncomfortable constable named Archer, who had never dealt with a murder before. He busied himself with a notebook, peering warily at the blood-stained stones and trying not to catch Lady Agatha's frosty eye. Inside, the mood was equally tense. The guests, many still in their wrinkled evening clothes, gathered in uneasy clusters beneath the gilded ceiling of the morning room. Lady Agatha herself was unsleeping and upright, hands folded like ivory over a ledger of household accounts. She barely glanced at the plate of untouched toast in front of her. A hush fell as Archer entered, followed closely by the butler, Mr. Hawkes, carrying a silver tray with the morning's correspondence. "No one is to leave the premises," Archer announced, voice thin but resolute. "We will be conducting interviews presently. Please remain available." His words stirred agitation. Sir Bertram Foyle straightened, his ruddy face clouded. "Are we to be prisoners, then, because of some freak accident?" Archer's ears flushed. "There's evidence of tampering, Sir Bertram. It was no accident." He hesitated, glancing at Lionel Lockridge, who stared fixedly at the cold fireplace. Clara sat beside him, lips pressed tight, eyes swollen from weeping. Archer's gaze fell on the fragmented marble in Lionel's grasp. "May I see that, sir?" Lionel started, then handed it over. Archer examined it, noting a strange residue along the edge, a powdery grit that shimmered faintly. "Did you find this by the body?" he asked. Lionel nodded. "It was just there. He faltered, glancing at Clara. "I don't know what it is." Archer pocketed the fragment, nodding grimly. "We'll need to have it tested." Meanwhile, Mrs. Blythe, the housekeeper, hovered near the door, wringing her hands in her apron. "If you please, Constable," she whispered. "Mr. Cartwright was outside far longer than usual last night. He asked me for a lantern around 9:30. I thought it odd." "Did he say why?" Archer asked. She shook her head. "Just that he had urgent business. Something he'd forgotten in the folly, perhaps." Simone Dulac drifted into the conversation, sketchbook under arm. She fixed Archer with a keen look. "I saw someone near the façade an hour before it collapsed. A man in a dark coat. I thought it was one of the staff, but—" Archer scribbled quickly. "Could you recognize him again?" "Perhaps," Simone replied softly, her gaze sliding to Lionel. "He moved with purpose, not like a servant." The evidence accumulated. Small inconsistencies, subtle contradictions. There was the missing lantern, the powder on the stone, the unaccounted-for figure near the façade. Clara's alibi was uncertain. She insisted she'd been in her room, but her maid, a soft-spoken girl named Alice, hesitated before confirming. Sir Bertram claimed to have been with Mr. Hawkes in the wine cellar, yet Hawkes' memory was frustratingly vague. And through it all, Lady Agatha remained inscrutable, her features set in cold control. She dismissed every suggestion of family discord or financial distress, yet her gaze lingered on Clara with something sharper than suspicion. By midday, the investigation had only deepened the mystery. The guests avoided each other's eyes, whispering in corners, their composure cracking under the strain. Constable Archer, overwhelmed and acutely aware of his limitations, excused himself to telephone the chief inspector. Before he left, Lady Agatha called him aside. "You must send for Hercule Poirot," she said quietly. "There are currents beneath this house that you cannot possibly navigate. We require an expert constable, someone who sees the truth beneath the mask." Outside, the façade gleamed coldly in the new light. Each broken shared a silent accusation. The real questions had only just begun. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. By afternoon, the opulence of Brackenthwaite Hall seemed hollow, the walls pressing closer as the weight of suspicion settled over its inhabitants. Constable Archer, now joined by the more imposing Chief Inspector Hemmings, broad-shouldered man with stern brows and a brisk manner, assembled the guests in the library. Dark wood shelves, lined with unread tomes, towered above the assembled group, their silent witness adding to the tension. Hemmings wasted no time. "None of you may leave until we have clarity," he announced. "We will begin by confirming your whereabouts last night, and understanding your connection to Mr. Cartwright." He gestured for Lady Agatha to begin. Seated with a dignity undimmed by shock, she recited her movements, hosting, attending to her guests, only leaving the ballroom briefly to speak with Mr. Cartwright about a private matter. Her words were careful, almost rehearsed. Hemmings made a note. Next was Lionel Lockridge, who perched on the edge of a chair, his knuckles white against the upholstery. "I was in the smoking room with Sir Bertram from 9 until the collapse," he said. We heard the crash and ran outside. He avoided looking at Clara, who sat rigid beside him. Clara, her voice tremulous, insisted she had retired early. "I had a headache. My maid can attest I was in my room," she said, glancing anxiously toward Alice, who nodded but with a hesitance that did not go unnoticed. Sir Bertram, gruff and red-faced, insisted he'd been with Lionel. "We discussed business. Lockridge family investments," he added, perhaps a little too quickly. Hemmings's brow furrowed as he wrote. Simone Dulac, the artist, was next. She stood beside the window, gaze fixed on the storm-tossed trees outside. "I walked the grounds before supper sketching the façade," she said. "Later I returned to my attic studio. I did see movement near the east wing, a figure, but I could not say who." Her hands tightened on her sketchbook. Mr. Hawkes the butler answered with professional precision. He was, as ever, everywhere, supervising staff, attending the wine cellar with Sir Bertram, fetching a tray for Lady Agatha. "I saw Mr. Cartwright pass through the hall at 9:30, requesting the back lantern," he recalled. "He seemed distracted." Mrs. Blythe, the housekeeper, corroborated the lantern story, her eyes flitting nervously from guest to guest. "He was agitated more than usual," she murmured. "He said he had urgent business but wouldn't say more." Finally, Alice, Clara's maid, stood wringing her hands. "Madam was in her room. I brought her tea," she stammered. Yet her eyes flickered to the floor as if uncertain of what she was omitting. Inspector Hemmings surveyed the room, aware that truth was a fragile thing here, pressed under years of habit, alliances and grievances. The guests shifted, exchanging uneasy glances. It was clear every one of them harboured secrets. Clara's unsteady alibi, Lionel's tension, Sir Bertram's defensiveness, Simone's watchfulness. Even Lady Agatha, serene as a marble statue, seemed carved around something hidden. With formalities complete, Hemmings closed his notebook. "We will continue with individual interviews. Remain available and do not attempt to communicate privately." As the guests dispersed, whispers surged in the hallways, rumours of debts, feuds, and silent rivalries. The collapse of the façade had only revealed cracks that had long spidered beneath the surface. No one dared to say it aloud, but each now wondered, was the killer among them bold, desperate, or simply patient? In the distance, the gates creaked. A taxi approached the drive, sunlight glinting off its polished roof. A small, immaculate figure stepped out, adjusting his hat with meticulous care. Word spread quickly through the house. Hercule Poirot had arrived, and with him the promise that every mask, however artful, would soon be removed. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. The gravel crunched beneath the taxi's wheels as it rolled to a stop before the imposing doors of Brackenthwaite Hall. Hercule Poirot stepped out, diminutive yet commanding, his grey suit unwrinkled despite the journey, his hat perfectly centred atop his head. He paused, surveying the grandeur with a glance that absorbed every detail. The cracked stones near the steps, the dust still settling on the trim, the heavy, watchful silence of a house in shock. Inside, word of Poirot's arrival sent a ripple through the assembled guests. Lady Agatha was first to greet him, regaining her poise as she descended the marble staircase. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming so swiftly," she said, her voice clipped but warm enough to suggest genuine relief. "We are most desperately in need of clarity." Poirot inclined his head, eyes bright with curiosity. "Madame, it is my honour to assist. A tragedy has occurred, yes? Such events, they rarely happen by mere chance." Chief Inspector Hemmings met them in the foyer, offering a brief, wary handshake. "Monsieur Poirot, the scene is at your disposal. I will answer any questions." Poirot's gaze flicked to the others gathered nearby. Lionel, standing tense by the banister. Clara, her eyes averted. Sir Bertram, arms folded. Simone Dulac, notebook at her side. He nodded politely, but already he was watching, weighing the tension in every stance and gesture. "I would like, if you please, to begin at the scene of the collapse," Poirot announced gently. "It is always wise to speak first with the stones, no?" The group made their way to the lawn, Poirot striding purposefully ahead. He knelt beside the shattered façade, his gloved fingers brushing the marble's edge. He examined the powdery residue on the stone, noting its unnatural shimmer. "Monsieur Hemmings, was this tested?" he inquired. "Sample sent to the lab, but no results yet," Hemmings replied. Poirot produced a small magnifying glass and studied the residue. He sniffed delicately, eyebrows lifting. Curious. It is not the ordinary dust of the stone, I think. Perhaps a chemical agent, yes? His eyes wandered to the footprints. In the dew-laden grass, heavy impressions, a scuffed heel, a second, lighter pair crossing at an angle. Poirot traced their paths silently, then straightened and turned to the guests. He addressed Lionel first. "Monsieur Lockridge, you were here after the incident, yes? Before the constable arrived?" Lionel nodded. "I tried to pull Mr. Cartwright free, but he was already gone." Poirot's gaze softened momentarily. "It's a difficult thing to see a friend like that." He glanced at Clara. "Madame Lockridge, you did not witness the event?" She shook her head, her hand trembling on her scarf. "No, I was in my room. I only heard the noise." Poirot noted the pallor of her skin, the darting movement of her eyes. "Are you sure you heard nothing before? No voices, perhaps? No footsteps?" Clara hesitated. "I heard a cry, I think. It may have been Hugh's." Poirot smiled gently. "Even a small detail, madame, can become important." He questioned Sir Bertram next, and then Simone, who repeated her story of seeing a shadow near the façade. Poirot listened intently, not interrupting, his eyes never leaving hers. "Mademoiselle, did this figure move like one who belonged here, or one who trespassed?" he asked. Simone hesitated. "They moved as if they knew the grounds," she said quietly. Poirot nodded, then excused himself to circle the ruin one more time, pausing where the broken lantern lay in the grass. He picked it up, inspecting the handle and the faint trace of soot near the rim. When he rejoined the others, his composure was immaculate, but his gaze had sharpened. "I thank you, Mesdames Miss, for your patience. Already the threads of truth begin to reveal themselves. There are many secrets at Brackenthwaite Hall, I think." As they returned to the house, Poirot's presence seemed to shift the very air, subtle but inescapable. The guests watched him, some with hope, some with fear. Already masks were beginning to slip, and Poirot quietly began to count the lies. Chapter 5. Initial Interviews. Begin. Poirot requested that each guest be sent to him, one by one, in the green drawing-room, whose high windows overlooked the ruined façade. The sunlight streaming through the glass failed to warm the air. Tension hung cold and heavy, settling around the edges of every conversation. First came Lady Agatha, upright and perfectly composed, her eyes unflinching. Poirot greeted her with an old-world courtesy, then leaned forward, hands neatly steepled. "Madam, you spoke with Mr. Cartwright shortly before the tragedy?" She inclined her head. "We discussed estate matters. He had drawn up documents pertaining to the trust. I told him to place them in my study. That was all." Poirot's eyes lingered. "Was there discord between you?" Lady Agatha's gaze flickered for just a moment. "Hugh was an invaluable adviser. My son, however, does not always appreciate his candour." Poirot filed this quietly. "Merci, madame. You may send in Monsieur Lockridge." Lionel entered, nervousness poorly hidden by a façade of control. He recounted his evening in the smoking room with Sir Bertram. Poirot's questions danced delicately. "You and Sir Bertram discussed family business, yes?" Lionel nodded, voice tight. "Investments? Debts? The usual?" Poirot's voice softened. "Was there disagreement?" Lionel hesitated, fingers drumming. "I did not agree with all his advice. He believed some family assets should be sold. I did not." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then, "You were the first to reach Mr. Cartwright?" Lionel nodded again. "By the time I arrived, the damage was done." Poirot thanked him and called for Clara. Clara entered quietly, her posture defensive. Poirot treated her with a gentle, almost paternal tone. "Madame, your maid confirms you were in your room?" Clara's eyes darted. "Yes, I was feeling ill. Alice brought me tea and then left. I heard the crash, nothing more." Poirot watched her closely. "Did you quarrel with your husband that day?" Clara's breath caught. "We disagreed, only as couples do." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Poirot nodded, letting silence stretch, but Clara did not elaborate. He dismissed her kindly, his mind busy with what she had left unsaid. Sir Bertram came next, bluff and indignant. "These questions are a waste of time, Poirot. It was a terrible accident, nothing more." Poirot smiled. "The evidence disagrees, monsieur. Were you ever alone last night?" Sir Bertram shook his head. Always with Lionel, save for a moment to fetch more port. Ask Hawkes. Poirot did not contradict him. And Mr. Cartwright, did you respect him? Sir Bertram grunted. Respected, yes. Liked. Not particularly. He meddled. Poirot bowed his head. Merci, monsieur. Next was Simone Dulac. She entered with a certain cool poise, clutching her sketchbook. Poirot studied her hands, steady, stained with charcoal. You walked the grounds? Yes, Simone answered. The façade fascinated me. I wanted to capture it at dusk. I saw someone in a dark coat. Did you recognize him? Simone shook her head. He moved quickly, away from the house. Poirot studied her face for a long moment, then dismissed her with a small, appreciative nod. Mr. Hawkes entered with a butler's dignity, answering every question with precise detail. He had seen Mr. Cartwright heading toward the Folly, lantern in hand. He was muttering, sir, looked troubled. Poirot thanked him, then finally called for Alice. The maid stood trembling in the doorway. Alice, you brought tea to Madame Lockridge? Yes, monsieur, she was alone. Poirot smiled kindly. You're sure? Alice nodded, but her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Poirot rose. Merci, mademoiselle. That is all for now. When he was alone at last, Poirot gazed through the window at the broken marble, mind, ticking quietly. Every answer had yielded not certainty, but new ambiguity. He closed his notebook, the pieces of the puzzle just beginning to form a shape in his mind. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. That evening the household buzzed with rumour and tension. Chief Inspector Hemmings, bolstered by Poirot's presence but eager for swift progress, summoned everyone to the grand dining hall. The long table, usually adorned with silver and crystal, was stripped bare except for Hemmings' notebook and a solitary unlit candelabra. He cleared his throat. I believe we have made significant progress. New information suggests that the tragedy was not as mysterious as it first appeared. Poirot, seated quietly to one side, said nothing. He simply watched, his eyes glinting with anticipation as Hemmings continued. We have examined the scene. The powder found on the marble was an industrial solvent, a substance available in the estate's tool shed. Only a few people had access, the groundskeeper who was away, and the staff. Hemmings looked pointedly at Mr. Hawkes, but most notably Mrs. Blythe, the housekeeper, who holds the only master key. A hush fell over the room. Mrs. Blythe stood, white-faced, trembling. Inspector, I would never. Hemmings cut her off. The lantern found at the site, the records show, was last checked out by you yesterday afternoon. Furthermore, you told Constable Archer you saw Mr. Cartwright near the Folly, but you failed to mention you followed him outside. Mrs. Blythe's voice wavered. I did not follow him. I merely watched from the window. I was worried for him. He looked so distraught. Hemmings pressed on. You are the only person who could have placed that solvent on the stone supports. You had opportunity, access, and you claimed concern. Was it truly concerning Mrs. Blythe, or did something pass between you and Mr. Cartwright last night? Tears gathered in Mrs. Blythe's eyes. Sir, I swear I did nothing to harm him. I was afraid for him, not of him. Simone Dulac shifted in her chair, biting her lip. Lady Agatha's lips were pursed in an unreadable line. Clara clasped her hands tightly, not meeting anyone's gaze. Hemmings turned to Poirot, confident. Monsieur Poirot, I believe this is our culprit. Poirot spoke at last, voice calm and precise. Chief Inspector, may I inquire, does the evidence show Mrs. Blythe ever left the house last night? Hemmings hesitated. Not that we know, but... Merci, Poirot said softly, turning to Mrs. Blythe. Madame, you say you did not leave the window. What did you see? Mrs. Blythe swallowed, wiping her eyes. I saw Mr. Cartwright walking quickly toward the east wing. He was speaking, almost arguing with someone. I could not see who. I was frightened and did not go after them. Poirot nodded gently. It is often easier, Inspector, to accept a solution when it seems to fit too well, but I urge caution. Evidence that is too convenient, too neat, often serves to distract from the truth. Hemmings frowned, but said nothing more. The tension hung heavy as Mrs. Blythe was excused, still shaking, and the rest of the guests were dismissed for the night. In the hall outside, Poirot stood by the staircase, gazing up at the portraits lining the wall. Hastings, who had arrived quietly that evening to observe, joined him. You don't believe Mrs. Blythe did it? Hastings murmured. Poirot shook his head, his expression unreadable. Non, Hastings. The real culprit is clever. He wishes us to look only at what is obvious and nothing more. But soon, the little grey cells, they will see beyond this smokescreen. And as the house grew silent, the seeds of suspicion, cleverly planted, began to grow in unexpected directions. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. As the moon drifted high above Brackenthwaite Hall, Poirot remained awake, pacing the shadowed corridors while the rest of the household slept fitfully. The false certainty of Mrs. Blythe's supposed guilt had left an uncomfortable hush. Poirot, however, was restless, his mind unravelling the threads of the evening's revelations. At dawn, Poirot gathered the household once more, this time in the conservatory where sunlight pierced through stained glass, painting fractured colours across anxious faces. He addressed them with a calm, unhurried confidence. Mes amis, in such a house, it is not only actions but intentions that matter. Sometimes the greatest clues are not in what is said, but in what is left unsaid. He began anew with Lionel. Monsieur Lockridge, you were quick to reach the scene. Were you also quick to judge? Lionel shifted, bristling under the scrutiny. I only wanted to help. Everyone expects me to. He stopped abruptly. Everyone? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Or is there someone whose expectations weigh especially heavy? Lionel's mouth tightened. My mother, of course. She expects perfection. She expects... He shook his head, cutting himself off. Poirot watched the struggle behind the words. Poirot turned to Clara, who seemed even more fragile beneath the conservatory's light. Madame Lockridge, do you ever feel unsafe in this house? Clara hesitated, glancing at Lionel, then at Lady Agatha. No, monsieur, only uneasy at times. Hugh Cartwright sometimes. He knew things I wished were forgotten. She pressed her lips together, offering nothing more. Poirot gave her a gentle smile, then turned his attention to Sir Bertram. And you, monsieur? Your partnership with the Lockridges, was it always amiable? Sir Bertram snorted. Business is business, Poirot. Disagreements happen, but murder, that's beyond me. And yet you were alone, even briefly, at key moments, Poirot said softly. You fetched the port, yes? A few minutes can be an eternity. Sir Bertram glared but said nothing further. Poirot then faced Simone Dulac. Mademoiselle, you have an artist's eye. What did you see that the rest of us missed? Simone's grip tightened on her sketchbook. I noticed the cracks in the marble weeks ago. They seem to be growing. Someone must have worked on the stone before the collapse, recently. Would you recognize their tools? Poirot asked. She nodded, then faltered. But anyone could have accessed them. The shed is not always locked. Poirot considered this, then surveyed the entire group. Often, the truth is revealed when the mind is pushed, when comfort gives way to discomfort. Tell me, who here felt truly at ease with Mr. Cartwright? Silence. Only the ticking of the conservatory clock filled the air. Poirot let the tension simmer, watching for involuntary reactions. Clara's clenched fists, Lionel's darting eyes, Sir Bertram's stubborn set to his jaw, Lady Agatha's cool composure, Simona's quickened breath. Very well, Poirot said finally. I will request everyone to remain together today. No one is to wander alone. Sometimes a secret will come out when the pressure becomes too great. With that, he excused himself, leaving the suspects stewing. In the hallway, he was joined by Hastings, who whispered, What are you hoping to provoke, Poirot? Poirot smiled faintly. It is not always the direct question, Hastings. Sometimes one must simply stir the waters and observe which fish rise to the surface. Throughout the day, Poirot kept a careful watch. Under his silent observation, tempers frayed. Lionel snapped at Clara for her reticence. Sir Bertram and Lady Agatha argued about estate expenses. Simone withdrew further, sketching in the shadows. Mrs. Blythe, released from suspicion, moved quietly through the house, but her eyes lingered on the guests with worry. By nightfall, the household was near breaking point, and somewhere within this pressure cooker, Poirot sensed, the true culprit was growing desperate, cracks in their facade threatening to show. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The following morning dawned heavy with unease, the atmosphere at Brackenthwaite Hall now sharp with suspicion and exhaustion. Even the breakfast table, a place of former civility, was muted. The only sounds were the soft clink of china and the occasional brittle remark. But the fragile calm was shattered when Mrs. Blythe appeared in the doorway, face ashen. Lady Agatha, "Pardon me, but the key to your study is missing. I cannot account for it." Lady Agatha rose, composed yet tight-lipped. "My study is always locked. I alone hold the key," she said, searching the pocket of her housecoat and coming up empty. The guests exchanged anxious glances. Poirot's attention sharpened. "When did you last see it, madam?" "Last evening, when I locked away the estate documents," Lady Agatha replied. "No one but I—" She broke off, suddenly uncertain. Chief Inspector Hemmings was summoned. He and Poirot, followed by a reluctant Lady Agatha and several onlookers, made their way to the study. The heavy door was indeed locked, but when Hawkes produced a spare key from the staff safe, they found the interior in disarray. Drawers hung open, papers scattered across the carpet. At the centre of the chaos, the box that had held the Lockridge Trust documents was open and empty. "Who has done this?" Lady Agatha whispered, her composure faltering at last. Poirot's gaze swept the room. This was not the work of an amateur. Whoever did this knew what they were looking for. He knelt by the open box, examining the velvet lining. "See here, the dust is disturbed only where the documents were kept. Nothing else has been touched." Hemmings frowned. But who would dare do such a thing, with everyone under watch? Poirot straightened. It must have been done in the early hours, or perhaps while the household was distracted. "Madam, who had access to your study?" "Only myself, and Mr. Cartwright when I permitted it. No one else." Poirot turned to the group. "Yet the key is gone, and so are the documents. It seems our culprit is desperate, willing to risk exposure to recover or destroy something of great importance." Simone Dulac hovered by the door, voice uncertain. "Perhaps it was simply theft. The documents may be valuable." Poirot shook his head. "Not valuable in the ordinary sense, mademoiselle, but valuable to someone here whose future depended on their contents." Sir Bertram stepped forward, face red. "Are you accusing us all, Poirot?" Poirot met his gaze steadily. "I accuse no one, yet. But I suggest we consider whose fortunes would shift most drastically if the contents of those documents were revealed." The implications hung thickly in the air. Clara's hands shook as she folded her napkin. Lionel stared at the floor, jaw tight. Even Hawkes looked unsettled. Poirot continued, "I ask that everyone search their rooms for the missing key. Report anything amiss, no matter how trivial." The guests dispersed, some eager to prove their innocence, others dragging their feet. Poirot lingered in the study, eyes narrowing as he studied the footprints in the thick carpet, some small and light, others heavy and deliberate. He noted the faint scent of a floral perfume clinging to the air, incongruous in the musty room. Later, as the household reconvened in the drawing-room, Poirot addressed them once more. "There is more than one mystery at Brackenthwaite Hall. The murder of Mr. Cartwright was the first blow, but now the theft of these documents signals a struggle still underway. Our culprit grows bold, perhaps reckless. We must be vigilant, for the next move may prove even more dangerous." As the rain began to drum against the windows, Poirot felt the net of secrets tightening. Somewhere within the grand hall someone was growing frantic, and as he watched the faces around him, Poirot resolved to follow every thread, no matter how tangled, until the truth stood exposed. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The rain intensified throughout the afternoon, the steady patter against leaded windows lending a sense of quiet urgency to the search for the missing key and documents. Poirot, undeterred by the dreary weather, moved from room to room, observing not only what was found, but, more importantly, how each guest conducted their search. Lionel and Sir Bertram scoured the smoking room and library, muttering under their breath, the strain between them now palpable. Poirot noted the way Lionel's hands shook as he rifled through drawers, and how Sir Bertram, usually so confident, seemed jumpy, his eyes flicking repeatedly toward the hallway. Clara lingered in her bedroom, pale and distracted, her search more an act of going through the motions than genuine effort. Poirot watched quietly from the doorway. "Madame, you do not seem hopeful of finding the key," he remarked gently. She started. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I doubt it would be here. I have never been trusted with anything of importance." There was a bitterness in her tone that had not been there before. Simone Dulac, meanwhile, moved about the house with unusual haste, her sketchbook pressed to her chest. Poirot intercepted her on the staircase. "Mademoiselle, have you found anything curious in your wanderings?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I saw someone. last night, after the others had gone to bed, a shadow moving toward Lady Agatha's study. I thought it was Lionel at first, but now I'm not certain." "Could you recognize the shape, the walk?" Poirot asked. Simone shook her head. "It was dark, and I was tired, but whoever it was moved with purpose, as if they knew exactly where they were going." Poirot thanked her, his mind assembling pieces. He continued his rounds, pausing at the servants' quarters, where Mrs. Blythe sat mending linens, her face creased with worry. "You have been with the family a long time, madam," she nodded. "Since Lionel was a boy, I've seen much in this house, sometimes too much." "Then perhaps you can help me," Poirot said quietly. "Tell me, what do you know of the relationships here? Who trusted whom? Who resented whom?" Mrs. Blythe glanced at the closed door, then whispered, "Lady Agatha rules with an iron hand. Sir Bertram and Lionel, they fight over money, over how to save the estate. Clara, poor thing, is lonely. She has no allies, not truly. And Mr. Cartwright, he knew their secrets. He kept their confidence, but he was not loved for it." Poirot thanked her and returned to the main hall, pausing as he noticed Hawkes and Sir Bertram in quiet conversation by the fireplace. The butler's face was tense, his voice a strained whisper. Poirot caught only fragments. "Can't go on, if they find out," before the pair separated at his approach. Later, Poirot convened, everyone in the drawing-room rain tapping steadily at the glass. "Mes amis, it has become clear that there are connections among you deeper than you have admitted. Family, business, love, and jealousy, all entwined." He looked around the room, letting his gaze linger on each face. "The person who stole the documents was desperate enough to risk everything. Perhaps the same desperation drove them to murder Mr. Cartwright. It is time to be honest, for the sake of your own safety." No one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. Poirot ended the gathering with a final warning. "The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when secrets grow too heavy to bear. I ask you again, if any of you has knowledge about the missing key, the documents, or the night of the facade collapse, come forward. The danger is not yet past." As the guests drifted away, Poirot stood at the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. In the glass's reflection, he saw not only his own face, but the pale, strained faces of those he was determined to protect. Somewhere in the shifting web of relationships at Brackenthwaite Hall, the final clue waited, hidden, perhaps, in plain sight. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. Evening drew its shadowy veil over Brackenthwaite Hall, the storm outside matched only by the tension brewing within. Poirot sat alone in the study, the lamp's glow illuminating the tangle of notes, sketches and fragments collected over days of inquiry. On the desk beside him lay the marble shard from the facade, its peculiar residue now fully analysed. Poirot ran his fingertip along the surface, lips pursed in concentration. There was a knock at the door. Hastings entered, his brow furrowed. "You look deep in thought, Poirot." Poirot gestured for him to sit. "Mon ami, I believe I have discovered something most telling, something that will change the shape of our investigation." He held up the marble fragment. "The powder on this, Hastings, it is not only an industrial solvent, it is laced with a rare oil, used only to clean and polish fine wood. There are but two places in this house where such an oil is kept, the butler's pantry and Lady Agatha's personal writing desk." Hastings frowned. "So whoever tampered with the facade had to have access to both?" "Just so," Poirot said quietly. "It narrows the field, does it not?" His eyes glinted. "More than that, the footprints in the study. One pair was smaller than the rest, almost dainty, with a broken heel mark. Tell me, who among our suspects wears such shoes?" They both considered. Clara, Simone, perhaps even Mrs. Blythe, but her shoes were always sensible and sturdy. Poirot tapped his chin. "Simone do lag. She moves lightly, yes, but she rarely removes her slippers. Clara, on the other hand, has a broken heel. She mentioned it to her maid the morning after the murder." Hastings sat forward, excitement flickering in his eyes. "You think Clara entered the study and the grounds?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "It is not for us to think, Hastings, but to observe and deduce. I suspect that Clara, frightened, desperate, sought something in Lady Agatha's study. But did she commit murder? That is yet to be seen. Poirot opened his notebook, reviewing his earlier interviews. A pattern was emerging, subtle but unmistakable. The theft of documents, the powder on the marble, the missing key, and now the mysterious perfume scent in the study, all connected by a common thread. The scent, Poirot now realised, was the same as Clara's favoured perfume, but faint enough to suggest she'd been there only briefly. He closed his notebook with a decisive snap. "We must proceed carefully, Hastings. The culprit is clever and growing desperate. They will try to cover their tracks, perhaps even lash out again." A sudden commotion erupted in the corridor. Poirot and Hastings hurried out to find Lady Agatha confronting Simone, who was clutching a sheaf of papers. "These are my sketches," Simone protested. "I was only—" Poirot intervened, lifting a sketch from the pile. His eyes widened. "This is no mere drawing, mademoiselle. You have captured something others missed. The broken lantern, the disturbed soil, the shadow by the study window." Simone blushed, flustered. "I draw what I see, that is all." Poirot inclined his head, but his mind was already racing. Simone's sketches confirmed what his grey cells had begun to suspect. The sequence of events had not unfolded as neatly as others claimed. Back in the study, Poirot pondered the clues he alone had pieced together. He now possessed a secret, pivotal clue, one that would either flush out the murderer or drive them to further recklessness. As the hall's grandfather clock struck midnight, Poirot extinguished the lamp, certain that the solution to the façade's collapse and Cartwright's murder was closer than ever. But for now he kept his discovery to himself, ready to watch and wait as the hidden truths at Brackenthwaite Hall edged toward revelation. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. By morning, the household was a tinderbox, the storm outside now matched by squalls of suspicion within. Poirot moved quietly from room to room, his presence both a comfort and a catalyst. The missing documents, the stolen key, the swirling rumours, every secret was drawn tighter with each passing hour. At breakfast the mood was brittle. Lionel barely touched his food, eyes fixed on the rain streaking the windows. Clara sat beside him, her posture tense, glancing nervously at Lady Agatha, who remained composed, sipping her tea as if presiding over a far more pleasant gathering. Sir Bertram scowled at the tablecloth while Simone sat apart, thumbing the edge of her sketchbook. The silence was shattered by the arrival of Chief Inspector Hemmings. He carried a small envelope damp with rain. "The laboratory results, Monsieur Poirot," he announced. "They confirm your theory. Industrial solvent mixed with a rare wood oil. Both the pantry and Lady Agatha's desk show evidence of tampering." Poirot nodded, face inscrutable. "Merci, Inspector. This narrows our list of suspects." Sir Bertram leaned forward, voice rough. "Whoever did this, show yourself. We're prisoners in our own home." Clara flinched, Lionel's hand closing protectively over hers. "This has gone far enough," Lionel muttered. "We should call a halt to these interrogations." Poirot regarded him calmly. "Monsieur Lockridge, it is not the questions that cause distress, but the lies. In truth, someone among us is willing to destroy everything to keep a secret." Simone looked up, eyes shining with fear. And what if the murderer strikes again? What if these secrets cost another life? Lady Agatha set her cup down. "Order will be restored," she said quietly, but there was a tremor in her voice. Tension soon spilled beyond words. In the library, Poirot found Sir Bertram and Lionel in heated discussion. "Your refusal to sell the land is dragging us all down," Sir Bertram snapped. "And your constant meddling only makes things worse," Lionel shot back. "Perhaps if you weren't so eager to blame others," Poirot interrupted, his tone soft but firm. "Gentlemen, anger often clouds the mind. But today, I ask you both, what are you protecting? Family honour, or something more personal?" Sir Bertram huffed, turning away. Lionel stared at Poirot, eyes hollow. "I want the truth as much as anyone, Poirot. But my family, my wife, we cannot take much more." Elsewhere, Clara and Simone whispered urgently in the conservatory. "I saw you by the study window," Clara said. "Why were you there?" Simone hesitated. "I thought I heard someone. I only wanted to see who it was. But when I looked in, the room was empty, except for the scent of perfume." Clara blushed. "It must have lingered from earlier. I went in, yes, but only to fetch my scarf." Their conversation ended abruptly as Lady Agatha entered, her gaze sharp. "Secrets, ladies. Now is not the time." Poirot watched all, never intervening directly, but noting every word, every nervous gesture. The atmosphere was close to breaking, suspicions rising, alliances forming and shattering in moments. Hawkes moved quietly among the guests, his normally unflappable manner strained. Even Mrs. Blythe, usually invisible, seemed unsettled, her eyes flitting from face to face. Late in the afternoon, Poirot gathered everyone in the drawing room once more. "The pressure in this house is immense," he said, voice low. "It reveals character and motive. The one who stands most to lose is now cornered. That is when people become dangerous." He let his words hang, the warning clear. As the day faded into uneasy twilight, the guests retreated to their rooms, each alone with their fears. Poirot lingered by the window, the storm now a faint drumming in the distance. He knew the endgame had begun. With secrets unravelling and trust shattered, it would not be long before the final piece fell into place. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. The following morning the air in Brackenthwaite Hall was brittle with anticipation. Poirot called for all the household to assemble in the music room, its soaring ceiling amplifying every nervous cough and shuffle. He stood at the front, immaculate as ever, eyes glinting with quiet resolve. "Mes amis," he began, "the time for evasion is past. The truth comes out whether we will or not. Today I must speak plainly." His gaze swept the room, lingering first on Clara, who stared at her folded hands, then on Lionel, face drawn and pale. Poirot's voice softened. "Madame Lockridge, you have been silent, but silence is often the loudest confession." Clara flinched. She began, then stopped as Poirot raised a gentle hand. "You entered Lady Agatha's study the night of the theft. The perfume, the broken heel, your nervousness. It is all there. But you are not a thief, madame, not by nature. You were searching for something that frightened you." Clara's voice wavered. Mr. Cartwright, he threatened me. He said he would tell Lionel about my past, about debts I hid. I thought the documents he held would ruin me." Poirot nodded. "But you did not find what you sought, did you? The box was already empty." Tears streaked Clara's cheeks as she shook her head. "No, it was gone." Poirot's attention shifted. "Sir Bertram, you too sought those documents. You argued with Lionel, pressured Lady Agatha. For you the estate's future is a matter of pride and survival, but you did not murder for it." Sir Bertram bristled. "I'd never—" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You fetched the porter alone last night, yes? It was then you saw someone at the study door, but you did not intervene. Why?" Bertram hesitated. "I thought it was beneath me to interfere in family matters. I regret it now." Poirot nodded, turning to Simone. "Mademoiselle Dulac, your sketches tell a tale of movement and opportunity. You noticed the cracks in the façade before anyone else. Why did you not speak up?" Simone looked at her feet. "I thought it was nothing. Only when I saw someone tampering with the marble that night did I realize the danger, but by then it was too late." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Who did you see?" Simone hesitated, glancing at Lady Agatha. "I think it was Hawkes, the butler." Gasps fluttered around the room. Hawkes's composure faltered for the first time, a tremor passing through his hands. Poirot addressed him directly. "Mr. Hawkes, you have served this family faithfully for years. Why would you risk everything?" Hawkes swallowed hard. "I was desperate. Mr. Cartwright discovered something in the old trust. Embezzlements, years past. To pay my wife's medical bills. He threatened to expose me. I tampered with the façade to frighten him, never imagining it would collapse so disastrously. I swear I never meant—" Poirot held up a hand. "Intent and consequence do not always align. Your actions set the tragedy in motion, but someone else finished the deed." The room stilled as Poirot continued. Someone used Hawkes's sabotage as a cover. Mr. Cartwright was lured beneath the façade at just the right moment. The timing was too perfect. He let the silence grow heavy, watching as each face reflected fear, shame, and dawning comprehension. Poirot's voice was grave. "The final truth is close. The murderer made a single mistake, a detail only they could know. That is what I shall reveal next." With that, Poirot stepped back, signalling the end of the confrontation, for now. The room erupted in whispers, alliances shifting anew. Poirot alone stood calm, certain that the last, most dangerous secrets were about to come to light. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The mood in Brackenthwaite Hall shifted from tense anticipation to a simmering panic. The confrontation in the music room had left nerves frayed and secrets exposed, but Poirot's declaration that the real culprit had made a crucial mistake weighed heavily on all present. No one felt safe, everyone felt watched. Lady Agatha took refuge in her study, guarded and cold. Sir Bertram stalked the halls, muttering about ruined reputations. Clara sat quietly in her room, numb with guilt and dread, while Lionel paced outside her door, determined to keep her from further distress. Simone lingered by the windows, gazing out at the rain-soaked gardens, and Hawkes, stripped of his butler's dignity, kept to the shadows, avoiding the gaze of the family he had served for decades. Poirot, meanwhile, observed it all with silent vigilance. He instructed Chief Inspector Hemmings to station constables at each exit. "We must anticipate," Poirot said softly. "A guilty party, cornered and desperate, may try to flee, to destroy evidence, or silence a witness." That evening, just after supper, a disturbance shattered the uneasy quiet. Mrs. Blythe hurried breathlessly into the drawing-room where Poirot sat reviewing his notes. "Monsieur, come quickly. Someone is trying to leave by the garden gate." Poirot sprang to his feet with Hastings close behind. Outside, the rain had eased, but the night was thick with mist. Lanterns bobbed across the lawn as Hemmings and two constables converged on the old gate, where a cloaked figure struggled with the rusted latch. "Stop!" Hemmings shouted. The figure froze, then darted for the shadows, but Poirot was waiting at the edge of the hedgerow, calm and unhurried. He addressed the figure in a low, firm voice. "It is over, madame. Running will not change what has passed." The cloak fell back, revealing Simone Dulac, her face pale with fear. She held a leather satchel pressed tightly to her chest. Poirot gestured for her to step into the light. "And what is it that you carry, mademoiselle?" Simone's eyes flashed with defiance. "Sketches. Letters. My work. I was afraid they would be taken as evidence against me." Hemmings took the satchel, opening it to reveal indeed a stack of sketches and personal letters. Nothing incriminating, but Poirot's gaze remained intent. "It is not only your drawings you wish to protect, no. You fear that someone knows more than they should." Simone's resolve crumbled. "I saw more than I said. On the night of the murder, I saw Lionel near the façade. He was arguing with Mr. Cartwright just before the collapse." The revelation sent a ripple through the group now gathered around. Lionel, who had followed them out, stiffened. "That's not true. I confronted Cartwright about the trust, yes, but I left him unharmed. I was nowhere near the façade when it fell." Poirot regarded both in silence. "Mademoiselle Dulac, your truth is valuable, but it does not condemn. Monsieur Lockridge, if you have omitted details, now is the time to clarify." Simone wept openly. "I only wanted to protect myself. So many lies, so much fear." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The one who killed Mr. Cartwright did so with calculation, not panic, but desperation. Desperation leaves traces, and tonight the pattern of those traces has become clear to me." As Simone was gently escorted inside, Poirot met Hastings' questioning gaze. "You see, mon ami, guilt makes people reckless. Tonight the true culprit has betrayed themselves by what they tried to hide and by what they feared most." Back in the house, Poirot asked that no one be left alone. "The next hours will be decisive," he told Hemmings. "The murderer knows I am close. They may yet act with dangerous haste." And as midnight approached, Brackenthwaite Hall was locked down tight. One last, desperate move awaited in the shadow of Poirot's watchful eyes. Chapter 14. The Final Piece. Falls into Place night fell over Brackenthwaite Hall like a velvet curtain, thick with the weight of all that had transpired. Shadows pooled in every corner, flickering with candlelight and fear. In the drawing-room, Poirot sat by the fire, his hands neatly steepled, watching flames dance while he replayed every word, every contradiction, every subtle tremor in his mind. The case felt like a puzzle on the verge of snapping into place, one missing shape, almost in sight. Chief Inspector Hemmings entered quietly, dropping into an armchair opposite Poirot. His eyes were bloodshot with exhaustion. "You see it, don't you?" Hemmings said, voice low. "Simone's flight, Lionel's anger, Hawkes's confession, but something still doesn't fit." Poirot nodded, his gaze fixed on the embers. "You're astute, Inspector. The facts. They have been scattered, as if a child had knocked over the pieces. They must be arranged. Order, logic, these will reveal the truth. He glanced up, his eyes shining. There is always a final detail. Always. For a while, the two men sat in silence, broken only by the distant chime of the grandfather clock. Poirot's thoughts spun around the sequence of events, how the façade was sabotaged, how Cartwright was lured, how the documents vanished, and how desperation moved each person through the house like pieces on a chessboard. Suddenly Poirot rose. "I must walk, mon ami. There is something that wishes to speak to my little grey cells, but it is not yet loud enough." He drifted through the darkened corridors, past portraits of stern ancestors and ancestral armour gleaming dully in alcoves. He paused outside Lady Agatha's study, staring at the locked door, recalling the faint trace of perfume, the small footprints, the order in which the thefts and accusations had occurred. Something about that order gnawed at him. The storm outside abated, and the moonlight filtered in silvery patterns across the marble floors. Poirot found Clara sitting in the conservatory, curled in a chair, her hands clenched tightly. She started when Poirot entered, but did not look up. "Madame," Poirot said softly, "you fear for your husband, for yourself? This house is not a place of comfort any longer, is it?" Clara's lips trembled. "I don't know what to fear any more, Monsieur Poirot. Secrets, everyone has them, but I never realized how heavy they could become." Poirot sat beside her, gentleness in every movement. "Sometimes the greatest fear is not what is done, but what is hidden. There is one detail, one small moment, that has troubled me from the beginning. On the night of Mr. Cartwright's death, someone gave him a reason to stand beneath the façade. It was not coincidence, but careful design." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I heard voices that night, Cartwright's, and another. I wanted to tell you before, but I was so afraid you'd think it was Lionel. I still can't be sure, but the voice was commanding, cold." Poirot nodded slowly. "You are more perceptive than you know, madame. Several people claim to have seen or heard things that night, but the sequence is always vague, always convenient. Someone has been clever in using the fears of others as a shield." He rose, pacing the length of the glass-walled room. Simone saw Lionel near the façade, but also claimed not to recognize the second figure in the dark. Hawkes confessed to tampering with the marble, hoping only to frighten Cartwright. But the collapse, the murder, was timed with such precision that only someone with full knowledge of Hawkes's actions and Cartwright's habits could have arranged it. From the hallway, footsteps sounded, light, measured. Poirot turned to see Lady Agatha enter, her presence as imposing as ever despite the hour. She carried herself with an air of unshakable authority, her spine rigid, her chin lifted high. Poirot greeted her with a small bow. "Lady Agatha, you rule this house with intelligence and will. May I ask a question? Why was it so important that the trust documents be locked away, that you alone held the key?" Lady Agatha regarded Poirot with cool composure. "It is the duty of the head of a family to protect its interests, Monsieur Poirot. Some matters must remain private for the greater good." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "For whose good, madam? The family's? Or your own?" A tense silence fell. Clara looked from Poirot to Lady Agatha, confusion and dawning suspicion in her gaze. Poirot pressed gently. On the night of the murder, Mr. Cartwright had an appointment in his calendar. Meeting Lady A. East Wing, 10 p.m. You called him out. You knew the exact time Hawkes had sabotaged the marble. You lured Cartwright beneath the façade. Lady Agatha's expression did not change. "You are clever, Monsieur Poirot, but you have no proof. I was with my guests all evening." Poirot shook his head. "No, madam. You slipped away from the ballroom at just the right moment, under the guise of estate business. The residue from your writing desk matches the solvent found on the marble. Your perfume lingered in your study, and the footprints, small, elegant, your own, were found in the carpet on the night the documents disappeared. Every move you made was precise, calculated." Clara's hands covered her mouth. "It can't be." Poirot's voice softened. "You did not act out of cruelty, Lady Agatha, but out of fear. Mr. Cartwright discovered embezzlements that had saved this estate, but which, if revealed, would destroy the Lockridge name. You protected your legacy. At a terrible cost. Lady Agatha's facade finally cracked. Her hands trembled on the back of a chair. He gave me no choice. Hugh threatened to go to the authorities. He said he would drag our name through the mud, ruin Lionel, ruin us all. I only meant to scare him, to make him listen, but... Poirot nodded with grave compassion. And in your plan, you used the sabotage Hawkes had set in motion. But you underestimated fate, and the strength of guilt in those around you. Chief Inspector Hemmings, who had followed quietly, stepped into the light, his voice firm. Lady Agatha Lockridge, I must ask you to come with me. Lady Agatha straightened her spine, tears in her eyes. I did what was necessary for my family. That is what you cannot understand. Poirot met her gaze with empathy. No house can be truly protected by destroying its foundation. Every secret becomes a weight, and in the end, even the strongest walls will crack. A silence settled over the room as Lady Agatha was led away, dignified even in disgrace. Poirot turned to Clara, offering his hand in comfort, and to Lionel, who now bore the crushing burden of both truth and loss. As Poirot left the conservatory, moonlight catching the silver in his hair, he reflected quietly. The last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, not by force, but by the inevitable perfect logic of human fear and the relentless pursuit of justice. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. The morning after Lady Agatha's confession dawned bleak and grey. A sense of emptiness had settled over Brackenthwaite Hall, as though the house itself mourned the collapse of its longest-standing pillar. Lady Agatha had been escorted away with all the dignity she could muster, her departure silent but for the echo of footsteps fading through the great hall. Yet within the drawing-room the rest of the household gathered once more, drawn by the gravity of unfinished business and Poirot's quiet summons. Poirot waited in the centre of the drawing-room, his small form made commanding by the certainty in his eyes. Chief Inspector Hemmings stood nearby, arms folded, keeping a careful watch over the proceedings. The guests assembled in silence. Lionel, hollow-eyed and pale. Clara, exhausted but newly resolute. Sir Bertram, his bluster now subdued into a withdrawn stillness. Simone, her sketchbook forgotten in her lap. Mrs. Blythe wringing her hands, and Hawkes, stripped of his formality, lurking in the background. Poirot cleared his throat, voice carrying with gentle authority. Mes amis, we've come to the final act. What remains are not merely accusations, but the unveiling of truths. I ask that you bear with me, for the moment of clarity is at hand. He paced the length of the room, pausing before each face as if reading their thoughts. You have all been caught in a web of secrets, some large, some small. Lady Agatha confessed to orchestrating the meeting with Mr. Cartwright, and to attempting to frighten him into silence. But her plan alone could not have resulted in such a perfect murder. She was desperate to save her family, yes, but desperation does not account for the precision of the collapse, nor for the missing documents and the careful staging of the scene. He turned, his gaze settling on Lionel. Monsieur Lockridge, you loved your mother, but you also bore the weight of expectation. You argued with Sir Bertram about selling the land, you clashed with Mr. Cartwright about the trust, yet you never intended harm, only to keep your family together. Lionel looked down, voice hollow. I failed them all, didn't I? Poirot shook his head gently. No, monsieur, but the urge to protect often blinds us to the cost. He shifted to Clara, her hands folded in her lap, gaze steady now despite the red rims of her eyes. Madame Lockridge, you feared the past would return to ruin your new life, but you did not murder. Your actions, while secretive, were not malicious. Clara nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. I only wanted to start over. I never imagined it would lead to this. Poirot moved to Sir Bertram, whose shoulders were hunched in a rare show of vulnerability. Sir Bertram, your concern was survival, of your legacy, your status. Yet your anger, your frustration, were not the tools of murder. You're guilty of pride, not violence. Sir Bertram met Poirot's gaze for a moment, then looked away. Poirot's eyes turned to Simone, who fidgeted with her sketchbook. Mademoiselle Dulac, your art sees much. You witnessed more than you shared. Your fear was not guilt, but the terror of being implicated. Simone's voice was small. I thought if I told the truth I'd be blamed for not preventing it. Poirot nodded. Guilt and blame. They are heavy burdens for the innocent. He faced Hawkes at last, The butler's dignity shriveled, but his devotion to the family plain. "Mr. Hawkes, you tampered with the facade, but not to kill. You tried to frighten Cartwright, but your actions were twisted by another's hand." Hawkes's voice broke. "I only wanted to buy time. If Lady Agatha had known. If I had confessed sooner." Poirot raised a calming hand. "It is not your hand that delivered the fatal blow." The room was silent, tension at its peak. Poirot straightened, suddenly commanding every gaze. "Now we come to the truth that has eluded us. Lady Agatha's scheme, Hawkes' sabotage, and the stolen documents, each is a thread in a larger tapestry, but the pattern only becomes clear when we see the timing, the placement, the manipulation of fear. The murderer did not act out of a single emotion, but by understanding and exploiting every weakness in this house." He produced from his pocket a torn calendar page. Cartwright's last appointment. "Meeting, Lady A, East Wing, 10 p.m. Poirot placed it on the table. Lady Agatha lured Cartwright, but as she departed, a second figure followed. This person took the key, stole the documents, and observed Hawkes' sabotage. This person alone had the opportunity to ensure Cartwright would be under the facade at the fatal moment. The final piece falls into place not with Lady Agatha, but with someone who orchestrated every detail from the shadows. The guests held their breath as Poirot turned to the window, gesturing at the rain now easing beyond the glass. For even the most careful planner leaves a trace. In the study, a heel print broke at the edge. On the marble, a single strand of dark hair, and in the ledger, a change in the schedule, a meeting entered not by Lady Agatha, but in a different hand. The real murderer watched and waited, and when the moment came, acted with cold calculation. He turned, eyes fixed on Simone Dulac. "Mademoiselle, you were the only one to move freely through the house, to watch unnoticed, to learn the secrets of both staff and family. You staged your innocence, your sketches, your silence, but you saw too much because you were there, guiding the night's events to their deadly end." Simone's face was drained of colour. Her hands trembled, and her sketchbook slipped to the floor. I never meant for it to happen like this. I just wanted him gone. He threatened me too." Poirot's voice was gentle but unyielding. "And so, you saw your chance, blaming Lady Agatha, manipulating Hawkes, ensuring you would not be suspected. But in the end, the truth reveals itself." Silence gripped the room, broken only by Simone's quiet sobs. The grand reveal had arrived, unexpected, but perfect in its inevitability. And as Poirot's eyes swept the faces before him, Brackenthwaite Hall seemed to sigh, released at last from the web of its own secrets. Chapter 16. The Reveal. For a heartbeat after Simone's confession, Brackenthwaite Hall seemed to fall utterly still. The air was heavy, suffused with the tension of so many secrets surfacing all at once. The room, filled with faces now drained of colour, was a tableau of shock, grief, and something like relief. For each person in Poirot's circle, the mask had finally slipped, leaving behind only the raw contours of truth. Poirot allowed the silence to linger. He paced the rug, immaculate shoes tracing a slow pattern on the faded embroidery. His gaze, keen and unflinching, took in every nuance of expression, every pair of trembling hands, every darted glance. He had seen this moment many times before, yet never exactly so, the intersection of guilt and grief, where revelation became both punishment and paradoxically a balm. Simone Dulac stood with her head bowed, tears glistening in her eyes, her slender hands clutching her sketchbook to her chest, as if it could shield her from what came next. Across from her, Lionel swayed on his feet, as if the floor itself had shifted. Clara stared at Simone as if seeing her for the first time, her own secrets now dwarfed by this larger, final confession. Sir Bertram had retreated to a wing-back chair, his body rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly his face had paled to near white. Poirot's voice, when it came, was very soft. "Mademoiselle Dulac, you must understand, every crime is two things. A puzzle, yes, but also a cry, a plea for rescue, for recognition, sometimes for mercy, but it cannot go unanswered." Simone did not look up. Her shoulders shook. Poirot spoke to the room at large. "Let us walk the path together, each step, each shadow. For only by seeing the whole picture can we know how such a tragedy became possible. He gestured gently. Lady Agatha, now absent, believed herself a protector, yet her actions became the soil in which despair flourished. Hawkes, motivated by love for his family, sought to hide his embezzlement, fearing disgrace more than ruin. Sir Bertram, prideful, feared poverty, and so he looked away. Clara, desperate to outrun her past, became an island unto herself. Lionel, crushed by expectation, grew blind to the fractures in his home. And Simone? Here Poirot paused, meeting her eyes until she at last met him. You, mademoiselle, were the observer. You witnessed it all. But you were also trapped by need, by guilt, by the cruelty of one who knew too much, Mr. Cartwright. Simone's lips parted, but it was Clara who spoke first, voice trembling. Why? We trusted you. I trusted you with things I've never told anyone. Simone sobbed, her sketchbook falling from her grip. Charcoal portraits spilled across the floor, faces caught in laughter, in fear, in loneliness. I never wanted this. I never meant for Hugh to die. He threatened me. My brother was ill. I sent him money I shouldn't have touched. Cartwright found out, and he enjoyed it, threatening to ruin me, threatening to tell Lady Agatha everything. I begged him to stop. Poirot moved closer, his gaze compassionate. And so, in your fear, you watched as Hawkes weakened the marble. You learned from Cartwright's own habits, his walks, his routines. You waited for the moment when he was most vulnerable. Simone nodded, tears streaming down her face. I only meant to scare him. I waited by the window after Lady Agatha left. When he came out, I told him I had something to show him, something important by the façade. He followed, still laughing at me. I saw the crack in the stone. He stood beneath it, gloating. I didn't touch a thing. I just froze, and then it all came down. The admission sent a shudder through the room. Sir Bertram's eyes blazed. You coward! You let a man die for your own cowardice, Poirot intervened, his tone sharp but controlled. Sir Bertram, there is enough guilt to go around. No one here is without blame. Each of you, in your own way, contributed, by action, by inaction, by silence. Hawkes, wringing his hands, finally broke down. If only I'd confessed. If only I'd gone to Lady Agatha, told her everything. None of this, none of it, would have happened. Poirot turned to him. Remorse comes too late to change the past, monsieur, but it can shape the future. Take what you have learned and let it transform you. Chief Inspector Hemmings, who had stood silently at the periphery, now stepped forward. Mademoiselle Dulac, you are under arrest for the murder of Hugh Cartwright. You will be treated fairly. You will have your day to explain yourself, but the law must take its course. 2 constables entered, their expressions grim. Simone allowed herself to be led away, pausing only to pick up her sketchbook. She looked once at Clara, then at Poirot. Thank you for telling it all, even if it is too late. Poirot bowed his head. The truth is never too late, mademoiselle. It is always needed. As Simone disappeared into the corridor, a profound quiet settled. Poirot let the silence remain, giving the household a moment to process, to breathe. The fire popped and hissed in the grate. The storm outside reduced now to gentle rain against the windows. After a time, Poirot began to speak again. His words, now softer, meant not to accuse but to heal. You have all suffered, but now perhaps you may begin to heal. This house has seen too much silence. Too many wounds were allowed to fester in the dark. Clara rose, crossing the space between herself and Lionel. We have to talk, about everything. No more secrets. Lionel nodded, tears streaking his cheeks. No more, I promise. Sir Bertram stood, looking older than before, but also lighter, as if an invisible weight had at last been set down. I will leave the family to decide the estate's fate. I have nothing more to add but my regret. Mrs. Blythe wiped her eyes, looking at Poirot. Will it ever be the same again, sir? Poirot smiled gently. No, madame, it cannot be. But something better may grow in its place if you allow truth and kindness to take root. Hawkes moved quietly to the window, staring at the garden now washed clean by rain. Perhaps I will plant roses, in Mr. Cartwright's memory. He loved them, for all his faults. The mood in the room began to change, almost imperceptibly, from grief to the earliest glimmer of hope. Poirot looked to Chief Inspector Hemmings, signalling that his work here was finished. As Poirot prepared to depart, he lingered in the drawing-room doorway. For a moment he watched the family, their wounds raw, their hearts uncertain, but their eyes meeting now without fear. Clara approached Poirot, her voice small but resolute. "Will you return, Monsieur Poirot, if we ever need you again?" Poirot smiled, tipping his hat. "Madame, I go where the truth is needed, but I hope, for your sake, that your days of mystery are at an end." Lionel, standing beside Clara, offered a handshake. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for seeing what we could not." Poirot's expression softened. "It is my honour. Remember, every family is a mystery, but honesty is its greatest defence. Guard it well." With that, Poirot slipped into the corridor, Hastings at his side. "Another case closed, Poirot," Hastings murmured. Poirot replied, "No case is ever truly closed, Hastings, not in the hearts of those who lived it. But order, at least, has been restored." Outside, the clouds parted and sunlight fell on Brackenthwaite Hall for the first time in many days. Poirot and Hastings walked out onto the gravel drive, the scent of rain and roses in the air, leaving behind a house forever changed. Within the hall, new beginnings would be slow, but, as Poirot believed, with patience, even the deepest wounds may one day heal. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. Dawn broke clear and cool over Brackenthwaite Hall, drawing long gold streaks across the lawns that only yesterday had witnessed scenes of accusation, sorrow, and confession. The storm had finally passed. The air itself seemed to carry a sense of fragile renewal. But inside the house, a lingering heaviness hung in the high corridors, a sense of things ending, of a reckoning finally at hand. Simone Dulac was gone. The authorities, respectful but determined, had escorted her away during the night, her final glance back at the house, a complex mix of regret and relief. In her wake, the mood among those who remained was subdued and pensive. There was no triumph in her arrest, only a deep collective fatigue. The secrets that had festered beneath the surface of Brackenthwaite Hall had been torn open, and everyone felt their sting. Poirot had risen early, taking his customary cup of chocolate in the small east-facing breakfast room. The sun, warm on his face, offered a rare moment of peace. Chief Inspector Hemmings soon joined him, hat in hand, his bearing both respectful and a little humbled. "You saw to the heart of it, Monsieur Poirot. There were so many layers, so much misdirection. I'm grateful. The local authorities would have settled for the most convenient culprit." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "Ah, but it is not enough, mon ami, to find a culprit. One must find the truth in all its complexity. That is the true justice, n'est-ce pas?" Hemmings nodded. "And what of them, Poirot? The Lockridges, the staff? What comes next?" Poirot's gaze drifted to the garden, where Lionel and Clara strolled arm in arm along the gravel path, silent but together. "They will grieve, they will heal, and they will learn. The darkness is lifted, but the scars remain. Yet sometimes it is only after the storm that one truly knows the value of calm." Upstairs, Clara was in her room, packing away small personal belongings into a battered valise. Her movements were gentle and deliberate. There was no rush. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Blythe entered with a soft knock. "May I help you, madam?" Clara turned and smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mrs. Blythe. I think I can manage. I am not leaving, just organising, setting things in order." Her voice, though tired, had a new steadiness to it. Mrs. Blythe reached out, taking Clara's hand. "You're a strong woman, madam. This house has seen much, but it will see better days with you here." "Perhaps it will," Clara replied, "if we allow ourselves to remember honestly, not just politely." Downstairs in the library, Lionel and Sir Bertram faced one another, each holding a tumbler of whisky in the early light. The air between them was thick with years of pride and rivalry, but something softer was emerging. Lionel spoke first, voice rough. "Bertram, I was wrong to push you away. Mother too. We all let the estate become a kind of battlefield." Sir Bertram grunted, but his eyes were less hostile than before. "You did what you thought best. We all did. And now, I suppose we must decide what matters most. The land, the house. It's just brick and soil. It's the people in it who matter, if we remember that." A slow smile cracked Lionel's lips. "Agreed. Let's try not to forget it." Elsewhere, Hawkes polished the silver in the dining room with quiet dedication. He had confessed his own guilt to Poirot, a crime born not of malice but of desperation and love. Poirot's promise to speak on his behalf weighed in the butler's heart as both hope and punishment. Perhaps, Hawkes thought, it is not too late to make amends by serving honestly. As the morning unfolded, preparations began for a small memorial to Mr. Cartwright. Lady Agatha, though not present, had requested through her solicitor that the family honour the dead, no matter how troubled his soul had been. The guests and staff gathered in the garden, near the old rose bushes Cartwright had cherished. Hawkes recited a short poem, and silence fell, broken only by the chirping of sparrows and the distant church bell. Poirot watched the faces before him, grief-stricken, yes, but also softer, more open. He felt the tension in the air ease as the simple ritual marked the end of a nightmare and the start of something new. Afterward, as people dispersed, Poirot found himself alone with Clara in the rose garden. She knelt to prune a faded bloom, her fingers gentle. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for seeing through every lie, even the ones we told ourselves." Poirot smiled, tipping his hat. "It is not for me to judge, madame. My task is only to bring light where there is shadow. The rest, redemption, forgiveness, that is for you." Clara straightened, breathing in the scent of earth and petals. "We will try. It's all anyone can do." Poirot rejoined Hastings near the front steps, ready to depart. Hastings, who had observed all in his loyal, bemused way, asked, "Do you ever grow tired of it, Poirot? Seeing the darkness in people?" Poirot chuckled softly. "No, Hastings. For where there is darkness, there is also the possibility of light. That is the hope in every mystery, if only one dares to see." He cast a last look at Brackenthwaite Hall, a house transformed by the pain of truth, but perhaps finally set free by it. As his car rolled down the drive and the sun rose higher, Poirot allowed himself a rare smile of satisfaction. Justice, in all its imperfect glory, had been served, and in its wake, new beginnings would, slowly, haltingly, begin to take root. Chapter 18. The Closing Remark. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Brackenthwaite Hall. The house, though quieter than ever, felt lighter now, as if the ancient bricks had exhaled after holding their breath for years. The day's memorial had brought a gentle peace to both grounds and household. Sorrow lingered, but so too did the hope of renewal. Poirot lingered by the old stone fountain in the front garden, suitcase at his side. He watched as Clara, Lionel, and even Sir Bertram moved together along the winding paths, their voices low but companionable. A sort of fragile camaraderie had formed, one that would take time to strengthen, but which, for the first time in many years, seemed possible. Hawkes, sleeves rolled, was already tending to the roses, uprooting weeds with the same meticulous care he once reserved for silverware. Chief Inspector Hemmings emerged from the house, pausing beside Poirot. "They'll be all right, don't you think?" he asked, a note of hope in his gruff voice. Poirot considered. "It will not be easy, mon ami, but yes. The Lockridges are a proud family, yet even pride can learn humility. The wounds are deep, but time and truth can heal almost anything." They stood in companionable silence, watching a flock of birds rise from the sycamores. Poirot turned to Hemmings. "You see, Chief Inspector, there is always a pattern, always a logic to the chaos. Even here, in this great house, the tangled threads could be unwound. It only required that each person look within as well as without." Hemmings smiled. "And what of yourself, Poirot? Do you never tire of the burden, of being the one to lay it all bare?" Poirot chuckled. "I have learned, over many years, that to bring clarity is not always to bring comfort, yet clarity is what the soul requires. Even the darkest secret, once spoken, begins to lose its power." As Hemmings returned to his duties, Hastings appeared, carrying a small brown parcel. "A little something for the journey, old chap," he said, pressing it into Poirot's hand. "From Mrs. Blythe. Seed cake, I think." Poirot beamed. "Ah, Hastings, you're a friend indeed." He tucked the parcel into his bag, savouring the familiar taste of English hospitality. With the hour drawing near, Poirot made his farewells. He shook hands with Lionel, who now bore a seriousness that had nothing to do with burden, but everything to do with resolve. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. If we ever have need, though I hope not, will you return? Only if you promise to keep your secrets fewer and your hearts open, mon cher, Poirot replied warmly. He turned to Clara, who reached out and squeezed his hand. You saved more than just the family's name. You saved us from ourselves. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Madame, it is you who saved yourselves. I only offered a mirror. The reflection... Ah, that is yours to cherish or to change. Even Sir Bertram offered a brusque, almost embarrassed thanks. I suppose we'll carry on. It's what Lockridgers do. Poirot nodded. Indeed, and perhaps this time you will do so with eyes wide open. Before departing, Poirot paused in the rose garden, where Hawkes wiped his hands on his apron. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, the butler said, voice husky, for giving me a second chance. Poirot patted his shoulder. You earned it, Hawkes. Serve well, serve honestly, and all will yet be well. A final moment. Poirot alone, strolling the grounds one last time. The air was tinged with autumn, the trees hinting at gold. He let his mind wander through the events, tracing the way each secret had shaped the greater tragedy, and how, in the end, even the worst mistake could give birth to new beginnings. He thought of Simone Dulac, her fate now in the hands of the courts, her remorse genuine, her burden heavy. He pitied her, but he did not excuse her. Justice must be served, yet justice, too, was always touched by understanding. As the car arrived to carry him away, Poirot climbed inside and took a last look at Brackenthwaite Hall, now bathed in a gentle, forgiving light. He felt no triumph, only a certain quiet satisfaction, and a hope that his presence had nudged these souls closer to truth and redemption. The road wound away from the estate, through green hedges and sleepy villages. Poirot sat back, savouring Mrs. Blythe's cake and Hastings' cheerful chatter. The world outside was ordinary again, full of small mysteries, but for Poirot it was the quiet after the storm that lingered most. He reflected on the nature of secrets, how they festered and grew in darkness, and how the act of uncovering them, painful though it was, could let in the air and the sun. It is always the same, Hastings, Poirot said, half to himself. People believe their secrets make them strong, but it is only in the sharing, in the telling, that strength is found. Hastings grinned. And what now, Poirot? Another case? Poirot smiled, eyes sparkling as the English countryside sped by. Ah, who knows, mon ami? There are always more mysteries in the world. But for today, let us enjoy peace and cake. The car rolled onward, the house fading behind them, leaving only memory and the slow, hopeful growth of forgiveness. And so, in the quiet afternoon, with secrets laid bare and justice served, Hercule Poirot departed Brackenthwaite Hall, his mind, as always, at peace with the order he had restored. Chapter 19. Epilogue. As seasons shifted and the air turned mild, Brackenthwaite Hall wore its history more gently. The scars of tragedy remained, small reminders in the quiet of empty rooms and in the silences between conversations, but something softer grew in their place. The roses Hawkes planted for Mr. Cartwright's memory flourished along the sun-warmed southern wall, their colours a gentle hymn to both sorrow and renewal. Clara and Lionel, with their wounds now slowly mending, began to breathe new life into the old estate. They opened the hall's doors to village fetes, summer concerts, and gatherings for those who had once gazed up at its grand façade with only distant awe. Laughter drifted through corridors where, not long ago, suspicion had hung thick as mist. Even Sir Bertram, changed by what had passed, found peace among the children who visited, sharing stories beneath the ancient elms and teaching them the patience of gardening. Simone Dulac, in the months after her trial, found a measure of grace in the acceptance of her guilt. Her letters, arriving from the quiet northern institution, were penned with humility and hope. She wrote of new beginnings, of making amends, and of her gratitude for the chance to remake herself, even in the shadow of great mistakes. Hawkes, the butler, was both a constant and a comfort, a little greyer, perhaps, but valued now not just for his service, but for his hard-won honesty. Lady Agatha, writing from her distant exile, sent thoughtful missives, her pride tempered by regret and the long view that only solitude brings, and Poirot, ever the observer, carried the memory of Brackenthwaite Hall with him. In his London flat, surrounded by order and quiet, He sometimes paused over a letter or pressed rose, reflecting that the greatest mysteries are those of the heart. Justice, he mused, was never just the letter of law, but the restoration of trust, the courage to step into the light together. At Brackenthwaite, life continued, less perfect perhaps, but brighter for the truth it had finally dared to face.